What's going on, everybody? I'm back with another video. This video is going to be looking at how Brentford thrashed Chelsea in the English Premier League by a score of 4-1. Now, before we get into the tactics behind the match, check out both my books. They're online on Amazon, and there's links in the description below. Also, be sure to check out Keyframe. It's how I'm making this video, and it's the program I always use. So now let's get right into it with Chelsea in possession. Chelsea went with a new structure in possession in a 4-3-3 that was similar and resembled qualities of Manchester City's 4-3-3 structure. Brentford countered this by playing in their base 5-3-2, and higher up the field they'd have their most central midfielder jump to then occupy Ruben Loftus-Cheek as the holding midfielder of Chelsea. And Brentford played very well in their defensive phase when they pressed in their mid-block and low block, and that's a lot of their chances came from their defensive phase and then adequately transitioning into a more attacking setup and playing very vertically allowed them to exploit the space between Chelsea's defenders, especially in the second half, that led to a lot of their goals. So now as Chelsea would move into the midfield third against Brentford's 5-3-2, we would start to see Chelsea's back four take place, with then Azpilicueta on this right-hand side, and by going with Alonso and Azpilicueta in their back four, they have two different player profiles on the left and right side to then give them different dynamics. As we would see, we would often have Marcos Alonso on this left-hand side come more narrow and try and infect the game in a more dangerous position, allowing then Timo Werner to stay in the wide area. And on the right side, Azpilicueta was more reserved in his movement, allowing more opportunity for a player like Ziyech in front of him to then have more freedom. Then in the midfield, we see our single pivot of Ruben Loftus-Cheek and then his partnership with N'Golo Kanté playing as the 8 allowed for Mason Mount and Kai Havertz between the lines higher up the field in behind the Brentford midfield. When Brentford would press or in their defensive setup in their 3/4 or mid block, they would have their two strikers press, blocking off access to the fullbacks using their cover shadows, and this was aided through a central pressing system that allowed the most central midfielder of Brentford to jump to the holding midfielder, allowing the play to be forced in through the midfielders to try and be played diagonally through the half space, where Brentford could then win the ball back in a more advantageous position, with their strikers both in the half spaces, allowing for a fast vertical transition. Now as we would move deeper, the lines would become flattened for Brentford's defensive setup in a 5-3-2, and there would be less jumping through central players and more jumping and partnerships forming now in the wide positions through the wide central midfielders jumping to go and press the fullbacks, and then followed suit by the wide central defenders jumping and creating a vertical partnership through the half space to then maintain this level of vertical compactness throughout the team and limit the availability of Chelsea generating any dangerous opportunities between the lines. As we see, their midfield 3, which was often accompanied by Kai Havertz dropping between the lines to then play as a false 9 or take up a natural number 10 position. So these vertical partnerships that Brentford used, with one central defender jumping or even two, leaving one free at the back, allowed them to have strong spatial control between the lines in dangerous areas against a very attacking Chelsea side. Later in the game, when Chelsea would be attacking the low block of Brentford increased their compactness around the central 3 corridors and limited the staggering and jumping between players. When Romelu Lukaku was subbed on, this then allowed Brentford to have less jumping of their central defenders with a more natural number 9 player profile within Chelsea's team, and so they prioritized having a man advantage as the central defenders, as we see one central defender free at the back to then give them superiority when Chelsea entered crossing positions, but we would also see more spatial control prioritized over man orientation and jumping. Because of the occupation Chelsea had between the lines, Brentford had to control this space using high levels of compactness horizontally and vertically, which we see here. Now when Brentford were in possession of the ball, they used asymmetry to then allow them to have a more effective initial build-up in their first third of the field, seeing that the right side of the field is overloaded, and Chelsea have to press in their 4-3-3 in different ways on different sides of the field. Now Brentford's build-up was very direct because of the man-oriented press of Chelsea, with Timo Werner and Kai Havertz pressing here, pressing the central defenders of Brentford, and then we see Conte and Mason Mount underneath them using man orientation to try and control the space between the lines. And we see Conte man marking Christian Eriksen, staggering their positions, with then Hakim Ziyech dropping deeper on the weak side to then control the run of the wing-back higher up the field. Now, whether Chelsea played with a back four defensively or a back five if we include Hakim Ziyech, the principles are still the same, with Hakim Ziyech responsible for dropping deeper and tracking the run of the wing-back of Brentford. Then in the midfield, we have Brentford using a three-man midfield and trying to then exploit space created by the two pinning forwards. Now this often left Rudiger as the free player in Chelsea's back line, creating superiority much like Brentford did against them, but then these attacking midfielders being able to find vertical passes from the central defenders, forced the Chelsea players to jump out of their defensive line, allowed Brentford to play very vertically and play a lot of third man concepts while having a forward implication and trying to exploit the space in behind. And we see how attacking Brentford play by the wing backs and the height that they use in possession showed they played a very attacking style, and when they went forward with confidence, which was really good to see from a Brentford team. Now we see the midfielders of Chelsea prioritizing the ball side, leaving the weak side player free in the attacking midfield position because circulation wasn't always feasible or easily accessible to Brentford because of their assets in possession. So by playing more vertically, they conceded space on the weak side in the half space, especially in dangerous areas, to then play this vertical style and attacking that allowed them to have more control over the match. That's where we're going to wrap up the analysis. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.